Let's start. Welcome everybody to this SAP and BPC Planning in the Cloud session. Not everybody has joined yet, but they will probably in the end join us. If you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A section in the Zoom session. There will be a Q&A session in between each agenda point, so that will then be handled. If there are any pressing matters or any questions that can be answered in the meantime, then Eline, my lovely assistant, will be able to answer them via the Q&A session. This session is recorded for later purposes, and it will end up on YouTube. That said, welcome everybody again, and let's start. Today we're going to talk about planning with SAC in the cloud, planning with BPC on-premise, and the overlap that we have there. I want to briefly touch the concept of planning just for a few moments so that we all know what we're talking about. I want to talk a little bit about planning on-premise with the BPC solutions and what we still have available to us. And I want to talk about the concept of planning in the cloud. I want to do a demo today about the planning in the cloud with the live connection, as SAP tends to demo the standalone planning or the import-export connection more often because it's better looking, basically. But I want to do a demo about the live connection to show you what you can do with the live connection in order that you have a complete picture of what's available. I want to talk a little bit about the concept of hybrid planning. And in the end, I want to talk about the standalone planning in the cloud solution of SAP. And then we end up with some questions. So why do we plan? Well, we plan because we have a vision of what we want to do in the future. And we want to forecast what could happen and maybe even have a prediction or an automated prediction done by a system so that the system gives us an example of what could be done based upon the information that we have from the past. We establish goals for the next year or maybe longer if you do a long-term planning. Or if you do a rolling forecast, you can do a planning for, say, 15 months into the future. You want to do an analysis of the financial situation that you currently have, and then based upon that information, you do a financial plan for the future. You implement the plan, and then in the end, you start monitoring and reviewing your financial plan. And that is a cycle that you go through each year. Now, what can we plan? This is a planning scenario that it's not the truth, let's say that. It's my version of a planning scenario. So what do you start with? Well, you start with strategic targets. So you have some top-down strategic targets that you want to incorporate into your plan for the future. And you can break that down into all kinds of operational planning chunks. So you can do sales planning, supply chain planning, HR planning, CAPEX planning, revenue planning, cost planning, financial statement, which is the end result of a planning cycle, and maybe even some liquidity management. But these are all independent chunks of planning, and the data that you plan has a reflection on other chunks. So if you do sales planning, your sales plan goes into your demand plan because based upon the prediction of sales, you can do prediction of demand. But the prediction of demand goes through inventory, supply, and response planning to a production plan and a global available to market plan or to production plan. But your demand also goes into your revenue plan because, well, the demand plan drives the revenue. The supply plan drives pricing because if the supply is limited, then pricing goes up. If supply is loads, then pricing goes down. And supply also goes into activity costs because based upon the supply that you have, you know how many people you should hire for running certain machines, for example, or well, capital expenditure goes into asset accounting and backwards. And then asset accounting goes into cost center planning, project planning, and internal orders in combination with headcount and personnel cost planning. So everything is linked to each other. Even cost plans are linked into between them. Pricing goes into revenue, and then in the end, everything goes into a profit and loss. And then the asset accounting in combination with profit and loss goes into your balance sheet. Balance sheet goes into cash flow statement, and cash flow can go into liquidity management. So this is a planning scenario where everything is broken down into pieces and the information flows from each piece to another in order to have, in the end, a financial statement for a plan cycle. Now, if we go to planning with SAP, I want to show the BPC version 11 where it comes from. So in 2007, SAP bought OutlookSoft, the company. Then OutlookSoft was made into BPC, the version 7.0 and the 7.5. The 7.5 combined with the BWIP solution that SAP already had was pushed into a BPC 10.0 version on NetWeaver, which in the end was, well, currently it's the BPC 11.1 version on SAP BW for HANA 2.0. And next to that, since a few years, we have Analytics Cloud for Planning, currently rebranded as SAP Analytics Cloud. So that is what we're coming from. And then we have a SAP planning landscape. This is a picture that SAP provides. Basically, you have on the left-hand side the classical planning transactions and in ERP. Those are hardly ever used anymore, but they are still available. Same goes for the older versions of BPC, both the standard and the embedded model. And then in the yellow section, you see SAP Business Planning for Consolidation and for Business Planning and Consolidation for S/4HANA, which is a BPC application that is being used in S/4HANA. So it's not used on top of BW for HANA, but it's actually in S/4HANA. And you can also have the SAP Business Planning and Consolidation version for BW4. And then in the end, on the green, on the right-hand side, in the green section, you see Cloud for Planning. This is a picture from SAP, therefore, this is their opinion. So the older versions of BPC, so the 10.1 version and older, should not be used anymore for new implementations. If you want to do planning in the SAP landscape, you should either use Business Planning and Consolidation for S/4HANA, or the version for BW for HANA, or the cloud version for S/4HANA. The BPC in S/4HANA and BPC on BW for HANA are apparently recommended for specific scenarios only, and the strategic product, according to SAP, is cloud. Are there any questions on the concept of planning?
So far, no questions in the Q&A box.
Okay. I hope I'm not talking too quickly. If I do, please say so. So planning on-premise. Planning on-premise can be done by BPC. BPC is a solution, an add-on for BW that is in the BW landscape. And if you use BPC embedded, you share your master data elements in BW. So in the older versions of BPC, where you had the own namespace in BW, the BPC solution was working on top of BW, but the master data should be loaded from the original elements to the BPC element. Now you can do the embedded version, or it's already available for some time, but you can do the embedded version where master data is shared. And then reporting and data entry can be done via Analysis for Office. And it's based on the same technology as IP. How does that look? You do have somewhat of a graphical interface in the web front end of BPC. It's quite basic. You can do some bar charts, some line charts, some overlapping charts where multiple data can be shown in one chart. But that's about it. There's no responsive web front end where you can select, well, I want to see this, I want to see this. It's just basic charts with some information. If you want to do planning, you should go to Analysis for Office and they do your planning there. So how does that look? Well, you have Excel-based planning workbooks. This is a balance sheet specification, but the same goes for any planning on whatever account you want to do. It's basically an Excel workbook where you have a query. You can enter data in the query and save that data to the database. There are some planning functions available. You can do Excel planning functions. You can do trigger-based planning functions like the older planning functions in IP. And there's an option for distribution, allocation, and you can also do locking of cells and copy pasting of data from other data sources or from other Excel workbooks even is possible. Now for some pros and cons for planning on-premise. I would say that corporate business is well served with an integrated planning on-premise. Why? Because corporate planning tends to have lots of data. And BPC on-premise can handle large data sets. You do have an Analysis for Office interface, which is, well, basically still by financials the #1 interface that they like, because Excel they understand. It's integrated into BW, which makes it easy for planning, and you have one version of the truth, and it's easier. What are then the cons of planning on-premise? There's no real fancy graphical interface. It's basically Excel-based input and Excel-based reporting. You can do some graphs in Excel, but it's not, well, it's not as fancy as a web interface. And there is not really the possibility for machine learning capabilities in planning predictions. You do have the option to use BW IBP functions from BPC planning triggers, but it's all, well, it's quite difficult to implement, and it's hardly ever used. Now, what are my recommendations for BPC on-premise? It's best to implement BPC on-premise in small pieces at a time, because a big bang implementation takes a lot of time. So break it down into line of business planning, and then have it. It can even be planned via SAC. I did see a question pop up.
Yes, there was a question, but it's already answered. The question was if this is Analysis for Office or is it the Analysis for Office for SAC? But if in this case, it's just a normal analysis for Office. Huh?
Yeah, normal analysis for Office indeed. Analysis for Office for SAC, I will briefly touch upon in a later stage.
Okay, that was it.
Okay. Now for planning in the cloud, you can do BPC in combination with SAC. What you get? Well, you get a visually good-looking tool online where you can do your planning. It's near real time, and anything you add to the planned system is visual in your graphs or in any of the charts that you have online. It's a web environment. You can still copy and paste values from other sources or from Excel or from wherever into your SAC planning, and you can do some planning functions either via data action triggers or BPC planning sequences, depending on how you use BPC with SAC. It's either data action trigger or a planning sequence. So for the live connection, you can do planning sequences, and for the import-export connection, you have to reverse to data action triggers. Just briefly, a picture of how that looks in a network version. On the left-hand side here, we have the import data connection. How does it work? Your BPC on NetWeaver data source goes via a cloud platform cloud connector through the firewall into your cloud. And if you have the live connection, so on the right-hand side is live connection, your BW for HANA data goes through cores to the cloud. And for the import and write back connection, you load your model from your BPC standard application to SAC, and the engine and the client are done on SAC. If you have the live connection, your model and the engine are on your BPC embedded model, and only the client resides in SAC. A little versus for live versus import. Live connection, it duplicates data. So you load data from your BW system to your cloud system. It's quite suitable for small data sets. If you load larger data sets, the lights went out. If you load large data sets from your BW system to your cloud system, you can overload the cloud system. And authorization for SAC should be set up in SAC. So if you have a BW user, you cannot reuse that BW credentials and user and all the restrictions that come with that user in your SAC environment. The import connection does provide more extensive functionalities than the live connection, and the planned data is available for the user only until published. So basically you have some kind of a sandbox environment where you make a version for your own. You fiddle around with the data, and in the end, if you agree on that what you have, you publish the data to the central database, basically, where everybody can see the data that you published, as long as you have access rights to that data. Now, how does the live connection then come into play? The data stays in BPC. So with live connection, there's no duplication to the cloud. All calculations that you want to do on that data can be done in either BW or HANA, depending on how the system is set up. So basically, there's no replication of data, neither master data nor transactional data. It is a real-time or near real-time situation. And if authorizations are set up in BPC, that same authorizations are also maintained in the cloud. There's no need to do that manually on the cloud. The drawback then is it's basically limited functionality. It's a grid-like planning, and that's about it. There's no value driver tree or either nice function that SAP has in the import connection. For the workflow of how data then comes from BPC into your SAC environment, on the back end of the cloud, you can do an import from BPC. How does that work? You import your model. So in this case, we have a BPC model with 2 line of business models, so either the yellow or the gray one. And that model is loaded into SAC. On SAC, you have all the functionalities that you can think of. So you have smart insights, version management, allocations, driver trees, data actions, logging of data, and you can all use this in your dashboard or in your planning dashboard. And the data is then split, as you can see. This is one BPC model that contains multiple line of businesses, and the data for line of business 1 is split into a smaller section. Same goes for model 2. But if we now plan data either in BPC still or in SAC, the data changes from the model, from the BPC model to the SAC model. So there needs to be a mechanism to load that data from one model to the other. That's the write-back mechanism. And what it does is it makes a delta change from the SAC model back into the BPC model. So all the dashed blocks of information here are loaded back into the BPC model, but the slashed data that's changed in the BPC model is not loaded back yet. Therefore, you need a delta change to refresh your SAC model from your BPC model. This is done on timestamping in the data, and it's well, let's say it's near real time. So if you publish your data and you send it back to your BPC environment, you can normally it would automatically also do a delta change back to your SAC model. What are my recommendations for the import-export connection? Well, as I said before, use it with small data sets because of limited storage in SAC. And SAC requires periodic data. Sometimes BPC is planned in year-to-date data. And if you want to use BPC year-to-date data in a SAC environment, that will not work quite well. So in the end, it's the best to use periodic data. Advanced formulas in SAC versus script logic or Fox in BPC. That means that any logic that you want to do on the data, so either calculations or distributions or whatever you want to do with the data in SAC, you should do via advanced formulas. In script logic or Fox in BPC, you can do, well, nearly anything if you know how to do it. And advanced formulas are less elaborate. There is one very important remark that I have to make, that if you do a deletion in BPC and an optimization of your database before loading the data into SAC, the data will reside in SAC and not in your BPC environment. That is for transaction data and for master data. If you delete master data in BPC, it's not automatically also deleted in SAC. Now, what are the functionalities for the import connection? There are some functionalities available in the import connection that are not available in the live connection, which are well, in my opinion, quite nice. So time series planning, smart insights, smart predict, and predictive functionality are not available in the live connection and are available in the import connection. And what does that get you? Well, the system gives you an estimation of what the future will become. So based upon the information that is available in the system, in the SAC system, it will give you a bandwidth of probabilities of what the future will bring, and also the most realistic scenario. You don't have to do anything for it. Well, you have to teach the system how to do this, but it can do this automatically, and it also shifts in time. So if more data becomes available, then the predictions will become more accurate, etc.
There are some questions about the import connection, so it might be good to do them now. Is there any data size limitation in cloud planning?
Well, it's limited to the storage of your cloud.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's it basically. So it's limited to the storage of your cloud. If your cloud is well, several terabytes of data is available for you, then that is the limit of your planning application. If you only have a planning application, if you have a planning application and you have multiple reporting applications on your cloud, well, then the data available for your planning application is less than the total amount that you have available to you. But there's no real limit to a planning application other than, well, how deep your pockets are, because SAP tends to well, ask a lot.
Yeah. And a question about the connections that you mentioned in the beginning. How about the write back data from SAC to BW? How are the connections made? But I would say it's the same, but
it's the same as the import connection. So what you do if you make a model, you say to SAC, this is the connection that I'm going to use, import the data, and then you have a well, in the back end of SAC, it says, well, we have an import connection, and you can do an export connection the same way until SAC will, if you store data, store it there.
okay. And this is about the predictive functionalities. Is predictive functionality in SAC not the same as distribution according to actuals functionality in embedded?
Well, distribution according to your actuals in embedded is it's how do you say that? If you plan a full year of a value for a full year, and you want to distribute it according to the previous year actuals, the total amount that you want to plan is divided by the total amount of last year and then multiplied by the value for January stored in January. So it looks 1 year back, basically. The Smart Insight and the predictive functionalities that come with Smart Insight look back to the entire past. As long as you teach the system that it should look back to the entire past. And then based upon that information, it will give the most probable outcome for the next period. So it's not just that the value that you enter is split according to the same ratios as last year, but even before you enter data, it can generate a probable outcome.
Yeah. I hope this answers the question. And then
if it doesn't answer the question, feel free to
just and ask again. We cannot
ask again,
unmute you. We cannot unmute you. So it's all via the Q&A box. SAP claims that you can replicate the security from BW to SAC. Are you saying that it's not applied to planning? But I think that's a difference between import and live.
That is indeed the import versus live models. So on import models, you should, or you cannot use the same authorizations that are available in BW, because the data is loaded to BW, from BW to SAC, and you have user on SAC. So it's not shared there, because the data then resides in the cloud and not on the BW system anymore. And with the live connection, there is no data on the cloud, and the user that you use to log into SAC is your BW user, and it's also connected to your BW credentials and to the restrictions that you have on BW, because, well, it's on BW basically.
I think that's the bridge to the next
and now
part.
we have to bridge to the next part, indeed, to the live connection. For BPC on a live connection, that's the middle part here. As you can see, it's a direct connection. You can use SSO. You have to have BPC 10.1 or a later version, and according to SAP, currently BPC 11 or 11.1 is the way forward. You do have to have an embedded configuration. Classical BPC configuration is not available via direct connection. Now, what do you get then? By planning via live connection, it's a grid-like planning, and that's it. There's nothing fancy or really fancy about it. It's just basically a trade-in of analysis for office to a cloud-based input. How does that work? Well, you make a planning model via Eclipse. You make ADSOs where you combine characteristics that are available in your system. The ADSO is then added to the composite, and on top of the composite, you make an aggregation level. You have to have an aggregation level, otherwise you cannot plan. And on top of the aggregation level, you make your queries. Those need to be planning-enabled queries. And well, that query is then loaded into SAC as a model, and you can plan on that model. So a short recap of the import connection. It doubles the data storage. Your authorization should be set up in SAC. It's a write-back functionality to BPC, and there are some advanced functionalities that are not available in the live connection. So the live connection, it just plugs into BW, so you don't have to load anything to the cloud. You can use your authorization in BPC from the cloud. It's real-time, but it has limited functionalities. So basically, it's analysis for office, but then with a better look and feel. Are there any questions about the live connection? Because then I want to see if I can switch to my demo. Let's see. Is this visible for everybody?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. good to hear. I made a model in BPC, and I used the live connection to pull my model into SAP. And this is basically what you get. It's well, what I have here is a business unit plan and a production planning. If I want to load, I want to plan, for example, for the US, I can. I just have 12 random figures here. I can copy that. I can paste it into. Sorry. Hold on. So I log in with my BW credentials. Again, this is my business unit plan, and I can do also a product plan. If I want to plan data, I have my 12 randomly selected values. I can plan them for France in this case. And if I want to do calculations, because I can do calculations, but the calculations are done on BW. Therefore, I need to load my data first from my input into my database. So I need to publish my version before I can do calculations on it. Now the data is stored in the database. And if I do my calculations on it for France, new records are created. I do have to save them again in order for me to see it in other models. So I have a sales report where I can check for France. And for France, we have third-party sales of 17.35 million and a cost of goods sold of 3.85. So how's that split over the periods? That's split for third-party sales. It's split like that, and I can also switch to my COGS, which is also split by period. It's quite a rudimentary planning, but that's it. I can do some scenario planning here because I can do a base case, but I can also say, well, I want to do a high case, low case, medium case. That is because I made a model in BW where I can choose for several scenarios. I can also do a product planning, and here we have a total column. So I can also say, well, I want to plan 24,000 for this new product. That is not supposed to happen. Hold on. Let's try again. So if I want to plan 24,000 products for the entire year, you see that the system automatically spreads it, in this case equally. You could also spread it via the reference cells. So if you have multiple years, you can also spread it to according to the same distribution as last year. If you, for example, say, well, I want to lock the first quarter, and in the end, I'm gonna say it's gonna be 30,000 instead of the 24,000 that I did before. You can see that the remaining amount, so the 6,000 difference between the 24,000 and the 30,000 is only spread over the not locked months instead of over these, because those are locked. Unlock again and then say, well, it's going to be 36,000, and then the change is made overall. You can switch from cell-based input to mass data entry for a model. And that means that if I fill in data, it will not automatically try to send it back, or at least do some calculations with it. So you can just say some data, and as you can see, it's not adding them up in the total column. If I now say process data, the data is added up. But as I said before, the live connection is basically this. You have grid-like planning, and you're actually you're trading in your analysis for office front end for a SAC front end. And that concludes the demo of the live connection, because
there's one question about demo.
Yep.
Is it possible to calculate without saving? I think that was a step you did in the beginning.
No, that's not possible. As the calculations are done in BW itself. So the calculation that I have here is a Fox-based BPC planning sequence that runs on the BW system. Therefore, as long as you don't save or at least publish your data from your cloud input to the database, you can run a calculation, but it will not do anything because the data does not reside in your BW system. It's just only available in your temporary storage on the cloud input. You publish the data back to your BW system, then you can run calculations.
Okay, clear. Yes.
Yes.
And there, it did give some time to ask questions. So, can you add comments on row level on your data?
Yes, you can.
And save them there for other users?
Yep. That is possible.
Okay. Data is written back from SAC to BW. Is that accessible in other BI tools that use the data from BW?
Yeah, it is. So once it's loaded back from your BPC environment to your BW environment, or from your SAC environment to your BW environment, it's available for any reporting or other tool that uses the same data.
I think that's already a good step to the hybrid planning.
And that is indeed a step
part.
to hybrid planning. So hybrid planning. Yeah. So hybrid planning with BPC. What it is a situation where you both use BPC for your corporate planning and SAC for your line of business planning. So input from line of business will be or can be done either via analysis for office because you have a BPC environment, but it could also be done via SAC. And then pushed back into your BW system and the corporate planning, into the corporate planning model, where all the data resides. You could, next to Analysis for Cloud, Analytics Cloud, use the digital boardroom if you want to. And also other reporting tools can make use of the data that's in the BW environment. So anything is interconnected. And then what are the recommendations? Well, corporate planning, BPC can handle larger data sets. Therefore, corporate planning should be done in BPC. Line of business planning, preferably taken into SAC. And you can do reporting and planning in the same dashboard, because you can do graphs and other interfaces on your BPC model. And the same queries that are used in Analysis for Office from a BPC perspective can be used in the SAC model. So it's just loading the queries as a model into SAC, and then the data is available.
There's a question, it's not related to the last part, but would SAC planning work with ECC or only S4?
That is a good question. I'm not. I'm contemplating the thought of using it on ECC. Not directly on ECC, I would say.
I
would say write it down, and then I will have to investigate, because from the top of my head, I would say that SAC is made to be plugged into either BW or let's hold on. Let's see. So SAC goes into on-premise data sources, BPC NetWeaver, IBP, S4HANA, via Cloud Agent into ERP. Universal SQL databases. I'd say that there should be a way to plug it into ECC, but I'm not sure. It's not designed as a tool that is easily plugged into ECC.
Okay, I will ask for contact details, and we can always get back to it. Yeah,
that's fine. Now, for standalone planning in the cloud, you can do loading of files, either CSV, TXT, XLSX, into your cloud environment. It's just basically import data from a file or a Google Drive or whatever, and you can make a model and make or load it as a model, and then start working with it. SAP has a large set of pre-delivered standalone planning parts that are available if you go to the rapid.sap.com website, where you can download it all and then load it into your SAC environment. This is more or less the same information as that we saw in the beginning with my own version of this information. So it goes from sales quantity planning into profitability planning, but also into quantity structures, and then into product cost planning, back to profitability planning, and in the end you have balance sheet information, cash flow planning, etc. This is all free available if you want to use it. It's available as a standalone planning solution in the cloud. And the funny thing about it is that you can actually use SAC in AFO as a model. So if you have a standalone planning solution in the cloud, but you want to use Excel as an input tool, it can. You can do your planning there, and then as you can see here, the system for data write back is actually our cloud service. So any data that you fill in and plan here and send back to the database will be sent to the cloud instead of to your BW system. Now, what are the pros and cons of that? It's a very good option if you do not have BPC. It comes with a lot of pre-delivered content, and therefore it's quick to set up. What are the cons? Well, the data is only available in the cloud. So if you want to load it back to BW, you have to make a flat file dump and load the flat file back into your BW system, or you have to load it via an OData connection, which is a hassle to set up. If you want to do calculations on it, it should be done via the advanced formulas of SAC, and you cannot use any of the fancy scripting or those kinds of formulas. So that's for the standalone planning in the cloud. I already prepared some slides for the most common questions that are asked after such a presentation. But we can start with any questions that are made in the Q&A. Any other questions?
No, but I will interrupt you if there are.
Okay, that is fine. So what about consolidation? Because BPC, well, the C for BPC is consolidation. Well, consolidation, if you have S4 and you want to do your consolidation there, you can have the option for group reporting, either on-premise or cloud single tenant or public cloud, but it's in your S4 system. You can also do consolidation via BPC, and that is standalone on-premise deployment. You cannot do consolidation in the cloud, or at least not BPC consolidation in the cloud via SAC. You can do S/4HANA in the cloud. What would my advice be if you wanted to start today with planning with SAC? I would say start with hybrid planning scenario, because you can break down your planning in chunks into your departmental planning in SAC and load the data directly into your corporate planning in BPC. And do you want to do that via the import-export connection? Do you want to do that via the live connection? It depends. If you want to have a replacement only for your AFO landscape or your AFO applications, then use the live connection. If you want to have a little bit more than just a replacement of AFO, use the import-export connection. Both are available, both are working. Is there a better way for one another? Well, I would say that both are quite good, and it can be that depending on restrictions, you are not allowed to load data to the cloud because of GDPR or because of the fact that it's highly sensitive data. Then use the live connection as there's nothing loaded to the cloud. If it's not, then well, you might even opt for the import-export connection. I saw a question popping up. Now, what about licenses? Because well, you have to have a license to use SAC. If you have a BPC license but you don't have a planning license for SAC, then you can use BPC on-premise. Logical. If you do have both, you can use either live or import connection. And if you only have SAC planning licenses, you can use the standalone version. Is there anything on the roadmap? Well, for financial planning and analysis, there is a lot on the roadmap for 2021. All kinds of updates for the entire year. A lot of things are going to happen for financial planning and analysis. For BPC, on the other hand, the only thing that's on the most right side of the roadmap for BPC is actually Q1 2020, and even that is an SAP Analytics Cloud update and not just a BPC update. So is there anything on the roadmap for BPC? Well, maybe a version 12 somewhere in the future, but that's not been broadcasted by SAP yet. Then what are the key takeaways? SAP Analytics Cloud is a modern user interface for planning. It's looking good, it's user-friendly, and the hybrid solution gives you the best of both breeds, so both BPC and SAC, and making use of same queries in case of the live connection. The import connection does give some great benefits like time series and predictive. And in the TechEd session of last week, there was a question from Nette Jacobsen to see whether or not it was also available for the live connection, Smart Insight. And according to Iver van der Zand, who is from SAP, it will become available in the second quarter of 2021. Then again, I still have to see that it's really becoming available, because the last presentation that I personally saw, when someone asked this question, they said, well, it's not going to happen. And with that, I can conclude this expert session, and you are free to stick around and ask more questions.